Your brand may be staying on top of current trends, but are you agile enough to stay relevant, resilient, and successful as customers, competition, and the world continues to change at a breakneck pace? I'm thrilled to share the newly revised version of my first book, The Agile Brand. I'm calling it The Agile Brand Revisited. It's been updated to reflect our continually changing world, and it provides 7 principles that form the backbone of an agile brand, offering detailed insights and actionable steps for incorporating them into your business strategy. This is the book that started it all, and I'm excited to share it with you. It's now available in print and digital formats and available everywhere. Learn more by going to the Agile Brand Guide website at www.agilebrandguide.com. Welcome to Season 5 of The Agile Brand with Grzanich, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an agile brand. I'm your host, Grzanich, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkilstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show.
You are listening to Intrapreneurs, presented by the Agile Brand. Welcome to the new podcast series I'm co-hosting with my colleague and friend, Grzanich. My name is Adam Chen, and I am an intrapreneur. Throughout my career, I have leveraged my passion for innovation and doing things differently into significant positive change for the organizations I've been blessed to be a part of. While entrepreneurs are often lauded with creating new businesses and ideas, it is more often the case that change agents working within organizations, or intrapreneurs, are responsible for innovation and seeing those new ideas through to completion. The Agile Brand Guide to Intrapreneurship shares stories and insights from leaders within and on the peripheries of organizations that have the vision, courage, and drive to create new ways of moving business forward. Featured stories and anecdotes from these intrapreneurs relay how they found success and the challenges that they faced when innovating within an organization. Today, my guests are Alex and Beau from Workforce.com, a leading global scheduling and HR platform. Welcome to the show, guys. Let's have you start off by introducing yourselves.
Cool, yeah. Thank you very much for having us, Adam. My name is Beau Grzanich. I'm the head of solutions for Workforce.com. Very excited to be having this conversation today. I think the topic is awesome.
Great.
My name is Ghiculescu. I'm one of the co-founders of Workforce.com. So I've been running it for about 11 years now. And I guess I'm kind of looking forward to talking from the entrepreneur side. And it's been really cool working with Beau and learning from him. So I'm happy to share some of that. I'm also losing my voice, so apologies.
No worries. Well, let's start with you, Alex. You kind of teed it up perfectly. You are a successful entrepreneur now. You know, you grew from my understanding, obviously you bootstrapped your business, as you mentioned, over a decade ago. How do you now, 10 years later, continue to drive and foster innovation now with a global company?
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, when we started, it was just kind of 4 guys in a room. And if we thought something was a good idea, we'd build it. And if a customer used it, that was kind of a bonus. And that cascaded to where we are today for a while. I think these days, it's kind of like trying to recreate that environment and mindset as much as possible. So I think we've gone through spells of things working well and things working badly over the years. I think the times when we've tried to have too much process or too much you have to sort of ask for approval before you can try something out is when things have gone the worst. So I guess it's kind of the inverse. It's probably the best way of looking at it. That said, you can kind of go too far in either direction. Like if everyone's trying new things every day, you lose sight of doing core business. That's also not good. So I think we've tried to really strike this balance where we encourage people to do things that they think are good and to work within their teams and within the smallest possible environment to test them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, obviously, you are an entrepreneur yourself, but if I say the word, and that gets all the press, right? But if I say the word intrapreneur, well, what does that mean to you? How would you unpack that?
Well, I hadn't really heard that word until you told me about this. So I think you're right about where all the press goes. Having thought about it, I think you're 100% right in your definition that, once a company has been running for as long as ours has, and we're not that old a company by any means, it's silly to expect the founder, whatever, to be having all the ideas. Like between the four of us, there's still plenty of ideas, some better than others going around. But we're in terms of headcount, we're a real minority of the organization. So I think it's really good to sort of identify the fact that there are lots of other people who can also do things differently as well. When I think of what entrepreneurship means, I think there's millions of definitions out there and there's movies about it. But to me, it's like understanding a situation really well and then applying a novel lens to it, I guess. And so I think that definition works well for entrepreneurship because I think, for example, Beau understands his job infinitely better than I do. I used to do it 10 years ago. I haven't touched it for a long time, but he understands his context of what he's trying to achieve and how to do it and the tools he has available and so forth, much, much, much better than I ever will or ever have the appetite to be honest. But so then he's in much better positions to think about different ways to do it or think about better ways to do it. And I think that's kind of the crux of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Beau, I might ask you the same question. Have you heard the word intrapreneur before? And I guess now that we're talking about it, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's also a new word for me, but I did like it, and I think that promoting it as an actual concept is I think going to be good for organizations. Entrepreneurship to me, compared to intrapreneurship, is the difference between innovation with risk and innovation with trust. So entrepreneurship, what the four guys who started workforce.com did was they had innovation and they took that innovation and they risked on it. And Alex has been posting some articles recently on LinkedIn, which kind of help understand what goes into that risk, whether that's financial or personal or career risk. It takes a lot to, I think, start a company. And I think that's what people don't necessarily understand with the difference between entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. When you start something and you are capable of hiring someone or bringing someone in, then what you're trying to foster is more of innovation through trust. And so I think as through this whole concept of intrapreneurship and finding success with an organization, ultimately your employment can't be transactional. It's not like people are just hired to do things or, perform task A, B, and C for 40 hours a week. And then that's how you're going to find success as an organization. You're employed to continue that innovation. You're not there as stopgap measures to, just hold things together. You're here to grow still. Growth comes with innovation. And the only way you can really do that is through trust. And so there's obviously a lot less risk when you join a company versus found one, but your perception of innovation, I think, is what really matters.
Yeah. I love both those answers. And yeah, innovation is definitely at the core, I think, of both. And, I think especially what we're trying to do here with this show is show that there's another path, right? That, if your risk tolerance isn't such that you want to go down the entrepreneur route, that there is an equally rewarding path. It's just a little bit different, but you can still kind of meet that intrinsic drive to affect positive change in the world.
That's great.
So that's great. Yeah. So let me ask a follow-up question then. So what in your minds, both of you, I guess, distinguishes an intrapreneur from just, a good employee, and what's the right mix within an organization?
Yeah, I think that it's, again, down to this transactionalism. Ultimately, companies, employment, all of these concepts are human organizations. So when you think of one of our core relationships in that you finding a significant other, if that relationship is transactional, it probably won't go very far. And so I think that you can accomplish a lot through a transactional relationship, but you're not going to drive innovation in a way that I think would differentiate a really good employee who can accomplish all the tasks you give them and they do it really fast and with pros and etiquette, but an intrapreneur is pushing the boundaries in some ways.
Yeah. So absolutely. And I've seen some of that myself in my career, but if you have like an entire organization made up of, idea men, if you will, right? I think you've bounced around that idea, like then nothing gets done. But then also, if you just have a bunch of doers, right, then you've got no novel ideas.
I actually kind of disagree with that definition, because I think, again, to use my lens, when we were starting out, there was a lot of ideas men around, and I don't think those people are entrepreneurs. I think the core of entrepreneurship, again, is understanding something really well. Is kind of the easier. It's part of it. It's not the majority of it. And then taking a different lens on it and actually applying that to the world is the hard part.
Yeah.
And so I think the idea that sort of having the idea and finding someone to build it is entrepreneurship, I think is really doing a disservice to those who want to create new things. Because it like implies that the easy part is the hard part. Right. So to apply it internally, then again, like I think about the people who have been really successful inside our business, who I guess push the boundaries, to use Beau's definition, and we kind of have a strong bias towards action across our company, but in particular, all of those have, like, anytime someone's come up with something new and novel, it's been like, hey, I did this. We should do something more with. We should make more of it. Yeah. As opposed to like, hey, I think we should do this. And the people who have lots of, hey, I think we should do this, but don't apply it, tend to get very frustrated. And the most interesting thing, I've got a particular person in mind at the moment who I'm not going to necessarily name drop, but there's one person who comes to mind who started off as like why are we doing this? This needs to be different. And my last job, it was like this. And he came from a different industry, so it was like a really big parallel. And then everyone kind of just got sick of him. Probably he was good at his core tasks. And a year later, he's like taught himself to code and is building the things that he was complaining didn't exist, and has gone way beyond what he thought was, oh, we need to do this, and is like built much more than he ever complained about, if that makes sense. And so I think that transition was really empowering, from being an ideas person to being driven by action.
Yeah.
I think this ideas man thing gets thrown around a lot, and it really triggers me.
Yeah, no, that's a great look at it. Well, let me change the pace here a little bit, I guess. And Beau, I want to ask you this next question. As an intrapreneur, as I would define it, you certainly have innovated within workforce. What conscious efforts do you take to impart your philosophy on your team or your colleagues?
Yeah, what Alex just said really resonated with me. In particular, that like enablement. You can be an enabler to like allow someone to, drive their innovation, but really that individual has to more have the inner desire. So like with that particular example of like, you had to take the year to learn to code to solve those problems that you were complaining about. I think applying that to my own team is being enabling in the way that, if there's something that they care about or want to explore, like not doing things for people, but giving them the skills and the time and the capability to figure these things out on their own, I think is what matters most.
Yeah. Well, maybe a follow-up question, I think, or maybe this is a question for both of you, I guess, Alex, like specifically, what have you done to help create that environment where someone like a Beau can kind of, thrive, as an entrepreneur? And then Beau, a follow-up, after Alex answers is, do you see those intentional efforts that Alex is making? And, what are you kind of paying forward, if you will, to your own team?
So to use another example with Beau, I guess, I remember a while ago, we were talking about like how he can help his team do more and be more advanced and be more effective for customers. And so I guess hopefully be more scalable as well. And one of the things that came out of that was that this isn't really me, apart from maybe me encouraging it, but they sort of all decided that they were going to go and do the same entry level like programming education that all the junior developers do. And so I bought them all a book, and then they kind of did like a little book club. And then every week they were doing exercises from the book and progressing through it. And you see this, like everyone says that they're going to learn to code over the weekend. But a few months later, these guys are where they used to be like blogging a ticket or requesting someone to help them with something. They're now just going and making their own changes to the product to improve it. It's based on issues that they're finding or the issues that customers are finding. The sphere that I'm involved in is obviously very specific on the technology side. There's probably lots of other examples. So I don't want everyone just to take away from this that unless you learn to code, you're not an entrepreneur. It's just the examples that I see. But I think they've been able to be much more an effective force by virtue of teaching themselves these more advanced technical skills that weren't really in the job description.
Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're like many marketing leaders today, you're inundated with a need to improve the customer experience across an increasing number of channels and touch points, all while ensuring your team is performing well, innovating, and continuously improving. So how do you find the time to determine what's next for you, your team, your brand, and your customers? My company, GK5A, can help. Whether it is advisory services, evaluation of marketing technology platforms and solutions, or digital agencies and implementation partners, or assistance with creating strategic roadmaps and prioritization of efforts, we've done it all and served as an ally to Fortune 1000 brands in industries like financial services, healthcare, consumer electronics, professional services, and more. You can learn more about these services and contact us at www.gk5a. That's www.gk5a.com. Now let's get back to the show.
Beyond buying them a book, does workforce.com, have a training budget? Do you create, specific hours during the day? Are there any specific tactics you've used or things that you've funded to help, drive that book club?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it funding. I would call it runway maybe. I'm very much personally, and I think a lot of people could resonate with this, a learn by doing kind of person. And so coding courses and coding books and all that, it's good for foundational knowledge. But I think what really made the difference for myself and for the team as we were learning that is we were given access to start doing those changes that Alex is talking about. And I think that that's unique, and we were trusted to learn through doing. It didn't have to be, designated 2 hours a day you can spend working on this bug ticket or something. It's just here's the tools, here's the resources for you to accomplish your objective. And you can go any direction you want with it.
Yeah.
That's whether that's filling out a bug ticket or investigating it yourself to find the answer. And I think that autonomy is really where that growth was cultivated.
I was thinking about your question about, budgeting for this, because I guess this is a topic people probably care about a lot. You've got to know how much you're spending on stuff. The book was $100, say. It was not much. We shared it across a few people. We put a time in the calendar each week that we would all catch up and chat about the progress that the guys had done that week. I attended 3 of those, and then my wife had a kid, so I stopped turning up. Before I did that, I did tap someone else on the shoulder and say, "Hey, can you go and do this in my place?" I've got no idea if he turned up or not, but I hope he did. Okay, that's good. And then once they were sort of a bit more confident and able to, as Beau said, apply the stuff they were learning, there was probably I imagine there was a fair bit of code review from people who were a bit more experienced, reviewing their change. They weren't just shipping stuff without any review or testing or checking at all. And then there was setting up their developer resource and things like that. But all those things, I think the most expensive thing would be the code review time. I don't think it's that. I can't imagine it was a huge amount of time spent, really. Sure. I think we're talking single numbers of hours total over the course of months, because most of the teching would be pretty automated or pretty easy to do. So you can do this stuff. I guess the point is you can do this stuff really cheap if you want to.
Yeah.
And if your bias is towards learning by doing as opposed to learning by courses.
Sure. What I'm hearing through all of this is that from an environmental standpoint, it's really culture. You've created such a unique culture maybe at Workforce that allows for that long-term thinking. I think the too many organizations I've been a part of, get bogged down in bureaucracy and, roles and responsibilities. And what I'm hearing from you guys is that there's really this dare I say, entrepreneurial spirit within the organization, and you really encourage and try to cultivate that. Does that resonate?
Well, I think there's probably 10 people at least who are involved in helping make this happen in one way or another, and they all just chipped in maybe just like 15 minutes of time that really made a difference. But they know who they are, and it adds up.
Yeah.
And I think anyone can take 15 minutes out of their core task to help someone else if it's going to be that big an accelerant. But I guess maybe it is. I think you're right. There's probably a cultural element there that I'm not seeing because I've got my blinkers on as to what makes it so hard to do.
Yeah. Well, Beau, I mean, you've done a few different things in your career. Like, maybe you can opine a little bit on the culture at Workforce. Like, what to you stands out about this particular organization?
Yeah, and that was actually a point of reflection as I was thinking about this whole podcast and what I've been able to benefit from Workforce. And that, of course, makes you think about your past experiences, what life was like at different jobs. And I haven't had too many different jobs. But the one that I did have before Workforce, I was in accounting, actually, surprisingly. And within this accounting department at a smaller organization, in between closing the months, which in accounting, that's it's really not much of an area of innovation. It's very much more process oriented and process driven. I had picked up doing a mild amount of like Power BI to help with our analysis of the given months and see where like AR and AP was, just helping try and innovate a little bit in the accounting department. At one of those points, it was a technology consulting company, and they had put out a job that they were hiring for, which was a Power BI consultant. And so I talked to my boss about it, and I was like, hey, I saw that you guys are trying to hire for a Power BI consultant. I'm, been doing this a little bit on the side for you guys, and I would love to put in like 10 hours a week to try and put some hours on a project and get better at this. I was like, I can free up the time. I know that there's enough time, especially on like down weeks, that, I can do and be more of use. And this was actually two months probably before I joined Workforce. My boss replied, and I forwarded this email to myself just as a reminder. It's like, we need to discuss this request as your note below is new information to me. How much are you working per week in the finance department if you're spending all this time outside of the finance department? There is no indication of this time outside of your finance on your timesheet submittals. Let's discuss this tomorrow. And I was like, wow, man, like this is...
You're in trouble now.
Yeah. It's like you're reaching out and you're trying to provide value. Like, I'm not trying to do anything besides help. I'm trying to help. I'm trying to grow myself and grow the company in a way that, better utilizes my time. And suddenly I'm in the doghouse for it. And so I think that, if I had sent that email at Workforce, the answer would have been much, much different. And the way that they had addressed that desire for an innovation was a lot of the reason why I left 2 months later. So I think that it's a little bit of an extreme case, but I think it's a great example of, if people want more, you got to give it to them. Otherwise, they're going to leave.
Yeah, I'm glad that email was sent selfishly, but also I can never imagine like you sending that email to one of your team. Like, I think if I heard you sent that email to someone who worked for you, I'd be writing you out about that as opposed to the.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's pretty eye-opening. Yeah, it's pretty eye-opening, right? Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's so many different styles of leadership, but you got somebody like yourself who I've obviously had the pleasure of working with, on a project, but gosh, you're thinking about the whole organization, like what leaders I'm going to try to, capture that. And people are dynamic, why keep them in a box? That's what drives dissatisfaction. And you're absolutely right, Beau. That's what's driven you out of that organization. So
right.
Very fascinating. Well, Alex, maybe you can talk a little bit about how workforce.com is structured. I know you have multiple offices in multiple countries and you're continuing to grow at a phenomenal rate. How is it structured today? And how do you think you might be able to kind of keep this culture that you've already built and keep that, going as you continue to grow?
Yeah. A lot of the people who a lot of the co-founders, I guess, and I guess people we've hired and friends and stuff like that, all seem to be political junkies. And so I think the best metaphor is probably federalism for how we've structured things. And what, like we have, well, I'm from Australia, obviously Beau's in Chicago. So we have offices in a bunch of different countries, which are like our main presences. So in Australia, the US and the UK, and then some smaller ones that are mostly just like sort of sales offices in Italy and Uruguay. And there's probably other ones opening this year as well, but I can't speak about yet. So it's very, very distributed. But then it's not like when people say distributed, they think of a remote organization where everyone never sees each other in person, but we don't really believe in that. So we kind of have these distributed offices where we try to push as much of the independence and decision-making into each of them. This causes many problems, but it's worth it. And it's like, so with things that are not really a shared resource, like go-to-market tactics, where they're shared, but like going to, like trying to win a new customer in the US doesn't really impact Australia that much. We try to have as much separation as possible and let each office do it however it wants. And the hope is that they'll learn from each other. So you've kind of got like all these experiments in sales strategy, say, or implementation, I guess, in Beau's world, that are being done very differently across different places. And it's partially because of regional sensibilities and partially just because people think it's a better way to do it. And you kind of, the best idea eventually wins. Although sometimes it takes a bit longer than I'd like for that, I guess, agreement or the consensus to form. Where that gets more difficult is with things that are shared. So for example, we have the same product and the same code base across everywhere. And so we can't just be like, you know, oh, when this feature is not useful in the US, let's bin it if the Australian customers really depend on it. So we kind of need to find that consensus constantly, which is a bit more difficult because it does create a bit more lag. We're getting better at that. I think people, like, as we grow more, people get more aware of this and are able to sort of, at the very least, like make sure their feature works in different languages, which is like a pretty big starting point. And then I think on that note, the last thing we try to do is to have as few roles as possible that are international. So there's a CEO, there's a COO, there's a CTO, and there's a finance and accounting team. And I think maybe I'm missing one or two off the top of my head, but they're really the only people who are supposed to work across different offices. Everyone else is really encouraged very strongly to just think about the market that they're in, and broadly speaking, or at least the time zone that they're in. We went through a period of trying to have like reporting lines that went across countries and time zones, and it was just so bad because of stuff like this. Like if your boss is 8 hours time zone away and you want to run an idea by them or just brainstorm something, and you have to wait to do a Zoom call, and then it's the end of your day and you're tired, it doesn't work. So we've tried to have as much localizedness as possible while having this like very loose global layer.
No, absolutely. I think you hit on it before, though. I mean, there's certainly, trade-offs, that, at the start of the top of that question. I think, you were saying, you've intentionally done this, but there are definitely some trade-offs there, but, the benefits are worth it, and I think that where organizations, if you're listening, you've got to really look internally and see, what you're trying to drive and what's going to be the most effective way to get to the outcome, and not just think about the paradigms that you're familiar with.
Yeah. An example is like when you go to business school, they'll tell you one of the benefits of larger companies is they can avoid duplicate resource. And the counterexample is like a project I think Beau can probably talk more about is we used to have like a piece of software that does the help site for our product. And we had one that worked globally, but then we have different brands and each feature is called a different thing in different countries. And so now we have bought 2 copies of the same product specifically so we can have like totally distinct sets of information based on different regions. And like an NDA would probably be losing their mind at this right now, but it's obviously, I think it makes the customer experience much better.
Yeah,
sure.
It sounds like it was a very fun project from what I've heard, though.
Yeah, it was a good one. Again, we're an HR software, so we're really ingrained into the local communities. It's not like we're working for Twitter or something generally your experience, it can be the same from the US to Australia. The content itself or the process is still relatively the same. In HR, the way that Latin America treats their workforce is much different than the way that the US treats their workforce or refers to things. And while it may end up, it actually won't cost us any money to have two of them. But even if it did, the confusion cost of extra onboarding assistance, because people can't read the help articles that you have, because instead of how to build schedules, it says how to build rosters, which, in the US, it makes absolutely no sense. I don't know what a roster is, but to an Australian, they don't know what a schedule is. It's referring to the exact same thing, but just terminology. Confusion on an onboarding process can really be a deterrent factor for how quickly you can understand things.
Yeah. Insight.
My guess is what's going to happen now. We've only just done this really recently. My guess is in a year's time, the two different copies of the product, which is awesome, we're not paying any extra, are going to be run totally differently. They're going to have like different styles of help article. One's going to be really factual. One's going to be really narrative based. There's going to be like huge difference. There's going to be huge divergence between them. And eventually it's going to become, I think, really obvious which styles work best. And there's going to be bits that you can mix and match from them. And so like we're now basically for free getting two approaches to the same problem. We can figure out which one's actually good and eventually normalize on that, hopefully.
Well, that's your technology background speaking, I think, right? You're running all these experiments, like you said before.
Right, yeah. But there's no developer is involved in this process, which is kind of the interesting thing. It's like maybe someone was involved in setting it up. But apart from that, now it's like on to Beau's team and his peers in other countries to sort of compete with each other on who can do it best.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, just a couple more questions here. Beau, I'm going to pose this one to you. Our listeners are hearing this episode and thinking to themselves that, an intrapreneur is something that I've never heard of, like you had never heard of maybe at the outset. And this is something that, resonates with me or they're passionate about. What recommendations might you give them?
I would recommend to them, if they run a team or they're interested in trying to drive intrapreneurship in their company, to just try and open up an open dialogue on what people are interested in. Because again, you can do all of these things, but if the motivation doesn't come from the individual, then it won't really, I don't think it'll happen, right? So getting an understanding for what your team cares about and what they want to do with their careers and what they're interested in exploring, and then just leaning into that, I think is what's going to benefit you the most. Letting them have that autonomy to explore it, as long as it makes a mild amount of sense for your business. I think we'll end up seeing that they'll be able to look at things in ways that you haven't before. And that kind of mindset is infectious. As people find success, others in different teams will probably want to try and follow too. To the culture point, it really is, once the ball gets rolling, it doesn't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. So just to summarize you got to start with your intrinsic motivation and be honest with yourself about what you want to accomplish. You have to be vocal about sharing that, right, with your team, and your colleagues. And then, like the example you shared before, maybe, if the response is to put you in a box, maybe that's not the right environment for you to thrive. So go out and find a company like workforce.com.
There you go.
Smooth.
Well, Alex, I'm going to ask you the last question. As someone that obviously was, an entrepreneur, bootstrapped this company, now you've got this global organization. What advice would you give to innovators in general out there?
Geez, where to begin? Read my blog for plenty more. Something I was thinking about off what Beau said, though, is I think it's easy to listen to this and be like, they're just like techies and, they have huge amounts of flexibility in what they can do in their day. So it's easy to find time. I think the example Beau gave when he was working in accounting, I know our finance team, when it's sort of, there's probably like half the month where it's like all hands on deck. We need to get the reports done. And our finance team is incredible because they get that. And one of the reasons why is because they are so effective when it's time to close the books. But there's always time that's a bit more quiet. And even when the busy periods, people still find a way to have good ideas when they're sort of grinding out the work. So I think it's easy to sort of create excuses around like, if your work is more task-based and if your calendar is more full, then you have an excuse to sort of just do it as it's always been done. And I think that's worth challenging, because I think about people whose job is to do outbound phone calls, and they have a very strict code on how many calls they're meant to make in a day. And we have a bunch of those people across our offices. And some of the weirdest, but also some of the most interesting and best ideas that I've seen about improving sales tactics have come from them. And I think they probably just have these ideas while they're waiting for people to answer the phone. So there's always a time to think of stuff, and then there's always a way to implement it more cheaply and more simply than you'd think, kind of to the example we gave before. So I think, I guess the moral of the story is you like whatever you think there's always more roadblocks in your head than there are in reality.
Yeah, sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and getting started is always the hardest step to take.
Yeah, totally. And so everything Beau said about creating a sort of the trust to do that is extremely important.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me on the show today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And if anyone wants to learn a little bit more, it's workforce.com. And thank you again.
Great.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Beau.
Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GREGKIHLSTROM.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.